and welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man who is currently all painted in blue and ready to shoot arrows at some Saxons. It's Tom Trezemer.
They call me the Woad Master. That's the arrow noise I make.
You're just shooting those things off like a Gatling gun, man.
Flaming arrows, that's how it is. That's how I do.
You know what's interesting? I was listening to this commentary, the director's commentary by Antoine Fuqua, and he was saying that a lot of people were complaining about Keira Knightley and her blue paint and kind of like skimpy attire. But he's like, in real life, what happened, according to history, the Woads, as they were called, they fought naked and they were covered in blue paint and they fought naked. So he's like, I was actually being pretty conservative. He's like, I actually put clothes on people.
And what I understand is Disney forced the PG-13 rating on them. If he actually had all the Woads fighting naked, he definitely would not have gotten that PG-13 rating. So, I think we're worse off for it, but, it was probably the right thing to do.
Just 10,000 Woads running around. It's just, this movie, it's interesting too I was also listening to the commentary for King Arthur 2004, and he went in thinking this was an R rating, and he said halfway through, when they realized it wasn't going to happen, so his editor joined this movie because he thought it was going to be R rated. They had filmed R rated. They thought the whole movie was R rated. And he's like, I just wanted to stop showing up. So he said him and his team had to keep each other motivated to keep showing up for work. He's like, I was destroyed. But
I'm glad they kept showing up.
I mean, but just think about that though. And so it's a Bruckheimer production. He had done R in the past, the 90s. He was really known for that. But I would say later on in the 2000s, he made the shift to more PG-13 type stuff. Mm-hmm. Bruckheimer did. But this movie, $90 million budget, right? Account for inflation. It jumps over $100 million. R-rated, with coming to the States with no massive names. I mean, Keira Knightley was just coming off of Pirates, so she wasn't too big in the United States. And also the poster showed her in front of, which is pretty funny, showed her in front of Clive Owen and Eoin Gruffudd. It's just an R-rated version of this would not have been smart, would you say? Gruffudd? Yeah.
I think it would have been tough for box office sales. I think we would have had probably a more rounded, better product if it was. And if I remember correctly, I also think that was an issue with the original theatrical release that came out in theaters at PG-13, that a lot of the battles and fights, they edited out a lot of the blood. Like, they literally had to go in and VFX out blood. Mm-hmm. They were anti-Ramboing Rambo. Instead of adding in the blood and guts and gore, they had to take it out. So that was a reference to Stallone's Rambo, where everything is so digital.
Yeah.
The later ones. But I just find that interesting, is that they literally had to tone it down, and they got criticism for it because there was no blood anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's like a guy's getting hacked in the side of the head with a hatchet, and there's just nothing. You just hear the donk of the helmet crush it in, and then he falls to the ground, and there's no blood.
So during the big battle scene at the end that took a month to film, they had up to 18 cameras filming at a time. They had special cameras developed to be put on swords that could pull off gags of going through a body. And so imagine the money that they wasted in planning on an R rating. Like, they couldn't plan on a PG-13. Does that make sense? So they almost doubly sort of screwed over Fuqua because everything he planned on was R. So, I mean, That'd be so sweet to see a camera on a sword stabbing through somebody that was specially developed from Sweden.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, just a neat gags out there and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, still, the finished product of this movie is, all right. You know what's interesting? I listened to CinemaSins on this. They were really hating on it. Got a 31% tomato meter rating. But this movie, it's good. It's not. I think people were expecting the lore, the magic. They weren't expecting like a David Copperfield-esque Merlin. Does that make sense? They were expecting a love triangle. And Foucault's like, I'm not messing with no love triangle.
Yeah, you're right. I think everyone was tying it into the folklore and the mythology and the legends of what King Arthur is. The whole sword in the stone and all that stuff, like actual legit, bolts of lightning flying from hands, the Holy Grail, that whole aspect. And all of that was removed for a more down-to-earth, gritty, realistic version or telling of the King Arthur tale.
With a stacked cast.
It is a stacked cast. Back then, not necessarily. They had, and this was interesting in the, if you ever get the DVD, they've got a really nice behind the scene feature called like The Round Table. And it's Antoine Fuqua with most of his cast and Bruckheimer and the writer sitting around a table talking. And Clive Owen mentions at one point, like, it's really interesting, like a lot of these guys weren't well known at the time, but they were like individually some of the most prestigious actors from their own countries.
Oh yeah. Like, Till Schweiger.
Like Till Schweiger, Mads Mikkelsen from Denmark. Like these were people that were well known to their respective countries, but not necessarily outside of that area.
Edgerton, Australia.
Yep. I mean,
wow.
They pulled a heck of a cast from all over the globe, smashed them into this movie, and then 15 years later, a lot of these guys and actresses are now household names.
While watching Hannibal, it just made me so happy. I'm like, these two were in King Arthur.
Yeah.
Or Arthur together. Like, I love that show, Hannibal, and seeing that. And what else? Oh, I had something else to say about this movie. No, I mean, just the stacked cast. I mean, they did this really well, bringing in these different people. And also, there's two things. In this movie, everything Clive Owen says, you're like, I'd follow him. Like, he's like a drill instructor almost. Like, he has a certain gravitas that I love. And then I finally figured out why I really like Stellan Skarsgård's Cerdic character, the leader of the army that's invading.
Saxons.
Yeah, the Saxons that's invading because the Romans are leaving. I like that Fuqua said Skarsgård didn't want to do it. But then they discussed, hey, maybe he's just this quiet guy that has done so much pillaging and rape and destruction that he's just tired of it. And he has no need to speak loudly. He has no need to be, braggadocious. He's just a quiet, tired...
He's more or less bored.
Yeah.
And so he's now just going through the motions of continuing what he started.
And I think I've always been very curious about his character because... I don't know. You don't see many characters like that. Normally the villains are more like the Till Schweiger of this movie, the Cynric. But I kind of liked how world weary Skarsgård was in this role. It seemed different, and I love that approach on it.
Everything is so, I wouldn't say nonchalant. He's very deliberate in all of his actions and what he says, but he's also very soft-spoken through most of his roles, or through most of his lines in the movie.
And I have another question for you. So this movie's basically about one more ride. Just when we thought we were out, we're dragged back in. So Arthur's guys, there's Sumerians, they won't get their freedom until they go rescue a young boy who's the godson of the Pope from northern England. But
so I guess in the historical context, this is like the fall of the Western Roman Empire, like right there around 500 AD. And all the Romans are pulling out except for these small, packets that are still left while they're being overrun by the Saxons and other invading clans.
And they're basically saying this is going to be the most dangerous mission ever that we've ever done. But if it wasn't that bad. If they just would have hurried up, they're like, pack your stuff. Like, if they just would have grabbed them, thrown them on horses, and ridden back, the Saxons wouldn't have caught them. Correct?
Probably not. But how do you right the wrong of them, of, those priests, walling live people up in their dungeons?
Can we talk about the elephant in the room for this movie?
Are you talking about Alexander and his elephants? No. Stupid joke. Go ahead.
I actually don't mind that movie. I like how insane and pompous and bloated and bombastic it is. But no, this movie... in watching it again, I really like Keira Knightley's performance. She was only 19 when she made this, and I think she comes across as much older. But she had been in that little hole for years, and her eyebrows are perfect. I know it's such a little thing to see, but every time I watch this movie, I'm like, oh, brother. Right?
Perfect eyebrows, perfect skin,
teeth.
Other than the dirt on it, perfect teeth.
Now, listen, that's a hater thing to say, and we need to suspend disbelief. And I think she's good in this movie. I think she actually pulls across... does really well with the physicality of the role. It's impressive. It's just every time you see it, you're like, oh, there's a scene again. right?
Well, in your mind, how do they fix it then? Do they smack a unibrow on her there for that first entrance,
And then,
or like some like big bushy eyebrows?
yeah, I mean, you know those movies where they go find the person and they have that terrible fake beard on, and then there's a shaving scene and it's off.
They just shave her unibrow.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's stupid.
It's good.
And I don't know what I could do about it. I don't know what the directors could do about it. The writers, Keira Knightley. It's not Knightley's fault. It's just whenever I see it, like you just been shoved in a little rock hole for a very long time. So it just seems.
Well, in fairness, we don't really know how long she's been walled up in there.
Yeah.
I mean, other than her having dislocated fingers and being dirty and muddy, as far as we know, she may have only been in there for a couple days, for as long as it took them to wall up 3/4 of that wall.
Yeah, I mean, it's just silly. Like that's the one. There's so many things.
All the things at the movie, that's the one thing.
Well,
one thing that bugs you.
Yeah, I mean, I just noticed a lot of people making fun of that, and so I just had to bring it up. And also, the behind the scenes documentary? I watched one. It's about 30 minutes long. You know, they spent like 3 months building that wall. So that wall that they fought on, like that, they built that. Like, obviously not stone, but that's a really beautiful construction that they did.
It is.
With
so
that wall.
That wall in reality is supposed to be Hadrian's Wall, which was one of like the border lines there in at that time, like northern
79
Britain.
miles.
Yeah. And so Fuqua and his team built a replica, it's a massive, probably over exaggeration of what that actual wall would have been 1,500 years ago, 1,500 plus, but they built it like 40 feet high and almost a kilometer long. Like it is huge. Like they wanted to limit as much VFX work as they possibly could for the Battle of Baden Hill, which is the final big galactic clash between the two armies.
Man, and I just love this, and it looks good. This is another thing while watching this movie. I think all the on-location work makes it look so much better. I mean, Ireland looks beautiful for this film. I mean, you could just point a camera anywhere in Ireland, it looks great. But I just love the on-location work that this film did. It does not feel, it feels, it's interesting. Ebert had something to say about this, and I don't know if you read this review. He was talking about how all the actors in Troy just seem out of place. He's like, none of these actors feel like they belong in this film. He's like, but you watch this with these Shakespearean trained actors, these stage actors, they inhabit these roles fully, and you actually believe they'd be alive in this time. Did you feel that?
Yes, I agree with Ebert to that extent.
And Troy is terrible, by the way.
Side note that I love Troy.
You were so angry the other day when I said I didn't like Troy.
Yeah, I was hoping to throw that into the podcast somewhere.
Did you do an angry walk after I told you?
I don't have very far to walk in the house, so I just kind of did circles inside. But
I got something back in all caps from you.
You did.
And 3 exclamation points.
Too much. I was pretty triggered after that moment. No, I agree with Ebert to that extent that the cast of this movie is so well done. And for having as little backstory that's given to them, they all have their own distinct personalities. Like they all have their own fighting styles, their own, jokes, their little banter with each other. You see the relationships, and it's really kind of a testament to Fuqua and everybody else involved that they were able to develop this much characterization with as little time as they actually had to do it, especially with so much time dedicated to the action scenes.
And
I think a lot of it too is like everyone has their own individual, like I was mentioning, their fighting styles, like their own individual weapons that help extenuate like who these people are, and then their own costumes. Like I find that part about the movie really fascinating.
So you have Arthur, he has Excalibur, just one big sword. You have Lancelot, who has two swords.
Two swords, and so I don't think you made it this far into the round table discussion. So Keira Knightley was practicing the bow for like 2 weeks before Iwan Gruffud.
Yeah, Gruffud.
That guy